tenuous grasp of international law and restrictions on
That
use
is a
of
really
force.
nice diplomatic way of saying he gives zero fucks. Hello, team, and welcome to Bureaucracy. I'm your host, Emily Gross, and I'm very excited today because I have Henry Ziemer with me, who's an associate fellow of the Americas program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. And we're going to be talking about what is going on with Venezuela and Latin America and Trump's insane actions that are certainly not legal and everything that what the fuck is going on. So, Henry, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me on and for that intro.
So, what are we drinking?
I have a Qingdao Chinese
Nice.
beer,
Very
which
good.
a good friend of mine got me hooked on, and I've been drinking it ever since.
I love that. I'm getting a sip of sunshine for what winter is fast approaching. Oops, sorry, I just startled my dog tremendously. Anyways, cheers.
Cheers.
Oh God, that's a really gross IPA. It's a really gross IPA. Okay. The question I always love to ask my guests is, why should we trust what you have to say?
I did a little prep for this, and I
Thank
knew this
you.
was coming. I still couldn't, I'm not quite sure how to go. I could tell you that I've been working on this subject for years. I run my own blog, too, on the side. So
Cool.
there's about a couple dozen people who subscribe to that who clearly think I matter. But I think
the same amount for this podcast. So,
but I think the really like the best answer I could come to was I'm still the guy who all my friends text when they want updates on what's going on in Latin America. So I feel like that is that would be my pitch. Is
totally.
that clearly they trust my analysis and they have to put up with me on a regular basis.
Right. And you're managed to keep the friends, and that's important. Because I'm also the person they text for political stuff and have managed to keep my friends. And it's a fine line.
Yes, it is.
So let's dive in. So we did a Venezuela episode. When I say we, me and my personalities, we did a Venezuela episode a couple months ago when the election occurred. And now we've seen this insane ramp up from the Trump admin conducting these outright illegal bombings of these quote unquote narco-terrorist boats. Once again, there is no proof because these people and boats have been blown to smithereens, right? And also a lot of I was reading research showing that these boats are oftentimes not even bringing drugs to the U.S. if they were to be narco boats. And it does appear like the Trump admin is trying to apply a lot of pressure to Venezuela and could be looking at a regime change. I would love your why now? Why is this happening now?
Sure. Yeah. So I think this was a prediction that me and several analysts made early on in the Trump administration, was that this would be a kind of historically focused on Latin America admin, that we would see a major pivot to the Western Hemisphere, and particularly under the sort of counter drugs, counter narcotics umbrella, and telling our regional partners, be careful what you wish for with that, because I think if there's one thing we've seen from sort of maybe the first Trump admin, one thing he loves to do is post short, compelling clips of him blowing up terrorists and saying this is how, or alleged terrorists, and this is how we are defending America. This is how we are protecting Americans and securing our borders. So I think that, very early on, Trump had said the drug traffickers are waging war on the United States. It's time for us to wage war on them. He designated several of these organizations, primarily Mexican groups initially, but also Tren de Aragua, Venezuelan outfit, or at least based in Venezuela originally, as foreign terrorist organizations pretty early on. We saw the rhetoric kind of escalate, and initially we thought it was going to be on Mexico. We thought Mexico was going to be the one to bear the brunt of the initial assault. Lots of worries about, Mexican airspace. We were flying MQ-9 Reaper drones over Mexican airspace for a time. That risk, I think that concern hasn't gone away, but there's been a big pivot to Venezuela. And the reason for that, I would say, is probably a couple things. One is Venezuela is sort of a thorn in Trump's side. Maduro and Trump have done this dance once before, and back in 2019 after the election, when Trump did what was called the maximum pressure campaign, trying to get Maduro, who I believe and who it was reported did steal that election, or at
Totally.
least was, undemocratically using means to
Maduro's an
remain in power.
asshole, and he's
Yeah,
absolutely a dictator and authoritarian, like, without a doubt.
right. And so I think, and we've seen reports that Maduro and Trump have quite bad chemistry.
Yeah.
I'll leave it at that. So I think there's a bit of score settling that's going
Yeah.
on. And second of all, I think that Venezuela is sort of I would say a relatively soft target.
Mm.
Unlike Mexico, which is our number one trading partner, robust country with international allies, and lots of people on both, on the U.S. side of the border who depend on trade with Mexico. Venezuela is relatively isolated from the United States. The main things that we get from them is oil, which actually the Trump admin, approved oil licenses to get more of while ramping up its rhetoric.
Fascinating.
And then their main allies are Russia and China. And I think
Right.
after this summer, we saw, look, if Russia and China didn't ride to the defense of Iran when Israel and the United States were striking them, they're certainly not going to ride to the defense
Mm.
of Maduro, who is much less strategically valuable. So I think he's a sort of Venezuela, and Maduro in particular is a compelling target, I guess, test case for this.
Interesting.
And I think that's why we saw, or at least we're seeing now, the escalation, the military escalation.
It's so interesting because I was doing some research, right? And Venezuela has the largest oil reserves in the entire world. And they also have a lot of rare earth minerals. And so I'm like, I definitely think that's tied in as well. Right. And China's been putting I don't know, maybe, please, I don't know
So yeah,
shit.
I no, I'm a little skeptical
Yeah.
of the resource war
Mm.
framing for this, because
Okay.
Venezuela obviously has major oil reserves,
Right.
but they haven't been exporting. They haven't been a major exporter of oil for the last 5 to 10 years.
Right.
Well before the U.S. sanctioned Venezuela, PDVSA, the state-owned oil company, had fallen off a cliff.
Mm.
And on top of that, Venezuelan oil is pretty sticky. It's pretty hard to refine.
Mm.
It's not the nicest crude. I'm not a scientist here. Um,
You're like
and then
subpar
yeah,
crude oil. I'm
subpar
like,
crude oil,
okay.
which admittedly, basically all the refineries on the Gulf of Mexico, now of America, are set up to refine that specific type of crude,
Got it.
but it's not particularly like good or useful. And on top of that, Guyana, right next door, recently discovered massive oil and natural gas deposits of its own. So I'm
Yeah.
sort of I think that framing definitely is compelling, but I always
Hmm.
want to push back at it, because I actually
Yeah.
don't think that's really that this is a resource war,
Interesting.
in
So
my
you
opinion.
think this is mainly a dick slapping contest?
I think it's a
To put it in such elegant
in
terms.
it's a term of art, isn't it? I think I think the mission is still counter narcotics, and I
Okay.
think that the reason, backtracking a little bit to my earlier
Yeah.
comments, yeah, there's bad blood between Trump and Maduro, but the reason we're so invested in this is because I think the Trump admin, or key players in the admin, have been convinced that Maduro is sitting at the head of the
Right.
narco-trafficking pyramid. Happy to get into that. It's not
Yeah,
totally
let's get
correct.
into that. Let's
Yeah.
dive into that. Because I know there's
Mhm.
Trendragua, and then there is another kind of government run-esque um drug ring.
Yeah.
We know Trendragua is real.
Mhm.
And then we know that the Trump admin has convinced himself that Maduro is the head honcho of this other massive drug ring.
Mhm.
What do the actual facts say?
Yeah. This has been another case where there's been people have been researching this for years,
Yeah.
and there's, the renewed focus on narco trafficking has led to a lot of kind of, I'd say, quick takes on
Hmm.
Tren de Aragua, and then Cartel de los Soles, the Cartel of the Suns, which
Got
you
it.
mentioned, which is this term, loose affiliation that's been used to describe state-backed drug trafficking.
Got it.
Cartel de los Soles and Tren de Aragua both exist. They are a
Mhm.
thing. They are a fact. Um, Whether or not Maduro is the kind of Pablo Escobar-esque kingpin of the Venezuelan narcotics market, I think is an exaggeration. Does he know about drug trafficking going on, and does he kind of quietly aid and abet it? I think yes. I think that
Yeah.
there's sufficient evidence for that. But I don't think, and this is just a comment about the nature of organized crime today too, it's not accurate to say that there is sort of one group that is directing all the drug trafficking that comes out of Venezuela. I think it's much more the case that Venezuela is a state with very little capacity and rampant corruption. And that
Okay.
means that you have officials who are willing to line their pockets with drug money. And you also have security forces that are simply unable to police Venezuela's borders. So it's very porous. It's very easy for criminal networks to get drugs out. So, you know, I definitely the rhetoric around Maduro is I think overblown. But I always do like to say it. You know, it's not true that drug trafficking from Venezuela isn't a problem, or that
Totally.
Maduro isn't involved in this. Yeah.
Interesting.
Mhm.
So, can you talk more about the drug trafficking trade coming out of Venezuela? Because from what I read, right, fentanyl is the massive problem. Fentanyl is terrible. It is killing. It's, I think, responsible for 69% of overdoses in the US. Um,
Yeah.
but a lot of the fentanyl that comes into the US comes from Mexico with materials made from China. And it didn't really say a lot about Venezuela or Colombia's, because I know we've started to attack Colombia a little bit, responsibilities for it. So can you dive into that a bit more?
Yeah, I think this is key because there has been this conflation of uh, all drugs are fentanyl, basically.
Right.
And that, as you point out, Mexico is the primary source of fentanyl. We don't see major fentanyl trafficking anywhere else, more or less,
Mm,
than at least in North America. And Venezuela, primarily the drugs that are coming from Venezuela, I am willing to bet you, is virtually 100% cocaine. I'd be shocked if there were fentanyl coming, you know, any amount of fentanyl kind of coming from Venezuela.
right.
On top of that, the cocaine that's coming from Colombia and Venezuela is overwhelmingly going to Europe, which has emerged as this major new market where you can charge higher prices. There's a lot more, you know, there's been mushrooming demand in Europe. So in a way, I was talking with a friend about this a couple months ago. In a way, this is the United States kind of bailing out Europe with an escalated, you know, which is the very thing that folks
Yeah.
like JD Vance don't want us doing. Um,
Right.
and the majority of the cocaine is still a problem, is actually coming from the Pacific route. And we've seen this tension
Mm,
coming up the Pacific coast from Colombia and Ecuador to the United States. We've seen this tension recently where the latest strike that Secretary Hegseth announced this week was in the Pacific off the coast of
right.
Mexico. So we're seeing this kind of tension in terms of what's the actual mission. Is it a anti-Venezuela? Is it a anti-narcotics broadly construed? So I think those are distinctions that are very, you know, very important to draw, and we've seen a lot of muddying of the waters where we mention drugs and, you know, we're meant to assume it's fentanyl, but in reality it's cocaine.
So interesting. What ulterior motives are there for Trump wanting a regime change in Venezuela?
That's an interesting question. um
Because
uh
he's not a pro democracy guy. You know?
Yeah, listen, I think there are I think, you know, I'll begin by saying, I think that I'll begin by saying I think Venezuela also wants a regime change.
Totally.
And I sometimes joke, I'm not opposed to regime change. We have one every 4 years in the United States. Um, uh, and so I think there are lots of well-meaning folks,
Yeah, I don't know
throughout the
if
world.
yeah, I don't know if Latin America and US regime changes have the best history.
And it doesn't. And it doesn't. I did write a quick piece though,
Yeah.
uh, last 2 weeks ago, talking about how U.S. regime change in Latin America could be surprisingly popular, and we're not prepared for that. And that's
Huh.
because look, the largest migration crisis outside of a major war is from Venezuela. You go to Colombia,
Yeah.
there's over 2 million Venezuelan migrants in
Yeah.
Colombia. There's over a million in Peru. The region has been dealing with this challenge for years. Guyana, neighboring Guyana, Maduro's been threatening to invade. So
Huh.
there's not a lot of goodwill in the region. I think there's
Yeah.
a number of people who are sort of who are tacitly excited or at least ambivalent to the notion that the United States would kind of come in and institute a new government, whatever that may be.
Right.
Within the Trump administration, I've also speculated on this. I think this is in particular there's a camp within the admin
Mm.
that uh, primarily is embodied by folks like Secretary Marco Rubio that has always been opposed to Maduro and would view it as, I think from Rubio's standpoint, would view it as a failure if he left office as the highest powered U.S. diplomat without effecting a regime, a change of
Yeah.
regime. Not saying regime change, but at least contributing to a regime collapsing or
Right.
changing in one of the sort of three authoritarian communist governments in Latin America, Venezuela, Nicaragua, or Cuba.
Yeah.
I think he probably sees this as a golden opportunity to push this forward, especially as Trump is sort of has a tenuous
Narco-terrorists, right? But with fentanyl being the problem, like it's just hard to grapple with. So it does feel like this regime change push, it's just the math ain't mathin', you know? And I
no.
know that we tried having relations with Venezuela under Biden and they did not abide by them, right? Because we had originally left sanctions, you know? So it's like, there's part of me, and I know it's what you said, and you're the expert, right? But I'm like, I really feel like oil's at the crux of a lot of it,
So I'm gonna be I'm gonna try because I get that. I'm gonna try
you
and give a
know?
bit of a counterfactual take here, which is
Please.
that I'll say we've been in the Caribbean for now 2 months, over a
Yeah.
little bit over 2 months, and we've had regime change rhetoric
Mm.
for a good amount of that. It was pretty shortly after we struck the first boat that Trump was saying, "Oh, we're going to move to land next." We were talking about Maduro's days being numbered. We've been pushing this rhetoric for a long time, and we've yet to strike inside Venezuela. Like we've yet to bomb them. We've
Look at
yet to
us,
do anything.
restraint.
No. I'm just saying, like, talking about the
Factually,
math ain't
correct.
mathing.
Right,
It,
right.
if the number of times that I've gone on Twitter and I've seen, oh, Trump press conference today, that's going to be the time that he announces that we're going to war with Venezuela. That's going to be the time that we announce regime change. And we
Right,
still haven't. And he had his press conference last week that was kind of just a go around, talk about all the stuff we're doing to cut down on crime and drug trafficking,
right.
kind of a love fest for his counter narcotic strategy. And we still haven't seen strikes inside Venezuela. And I think the reason for that is because even much as we may be kind of trigger happy, if there's one thing that's pretty consistent about Trump's foreign policy is a desire to avoid getting into another forever war. And I think
Right.
that there is someone inside the White House. The calculus is if we blow up something inside Venezuela, there's a very slippery slope that leads to regime change, and then you break it, you buy it.
Mm.
If Venezuela collapses, if the opposition, which is much more organized, much more coherent than we saw like in a place like Iraq, if the opposition is unable to control the entire territory, we could see actually worse organized crime, and we could see more drug trafficking. We could see,
Right.
the absolute opposite of what you want. And I think people, and that would require, if we really want to get a handle on it at that point, that would require U.S. boots on the ground, U.S. troops deployed to Venezuela, and that's something that Trump still wants to avoid. And I think that in the back of his head, or in the back of the head of one of the advisors in the White House, I think there is this acknowledgement and this
Yeah.
understanding. And I think that's why we have yet to see I don't know, let's go all in.
Right.
Mhm.
Which makes sense. I mean, when they did the Iran bombing, it angered a huge chunk of his base.
Yeah. And then he said, "Well, all right, turn around. War's over. Declare
We're done.
victory. Plant the flag. We're
Right.
done. Like we're not going to
Right.
get more involved in this."
Um, what did you make of the announcement that Trump approved covert CIA actions?
Yeah, that was another interesting one because obviously the whole point of covert operations is you're not supposed to know about them until after
Covert.
they're done. Yeah.
Correct.
So I see sort of a couple different scenarios. One is that we've already been doing ops and we're just kind of now publicly announcing them. And
Right.
there have been some reports recently, you might have seen there was a report that we tried to flip Maduro's private pilot.
Yeah.
So,
And Maduro just arrested some alleged CIA
alleged
operatives. Alleged.
saboteurs. Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't trust Maduro's
No, no, no.
statements
Don't trust
further
anything
than
that
I can
comes out of
flow
their
them.
mouth.
Yeah.
Right.
Um. But right. Maybe there were ops ongoing, and we're now just publicly acknowledging them. Maybe you know, maybe there is it's just another part of the pressure campaign,
Yeah.
or one of my pet theories, which is this is an effort to kind of push the CIA, which under Trump
Mm.
1.0 back in 2019 was very reluctant to kind of come up with what we would think about as stereotypical CIA operations. CIA was actually like quite dovish
Yeah.
by the reporting I've seen in 2019. It's an effort to push the CIA to try and get more skin in the game.
Right.
And maybe stoke some sort of interagency rivalries
Mm.
between CIA and DoD to try and up the pressure. Well, just me speaking with my
Theorizing.
theorizer hat on.
Right.
Yeah. Hmm.
Let's say Trump does invade Venezuela, bombs Venezuela.
Hmm.
What do we think is going to happen?
Yeah. So this is getting back to my last comments. You probably want. I think Trump still probably wants. He just wants to blow up a drug trafficker. He wants to find a lab or some people moving
Right.
drugs and blow them up. The thing is, Venezuela does have air defenses. They're not
Hmm.
good. They're not very robust,
Right.
but they exist. And it looks really embarrassing, one, if they are able to shoot down or threaten U.S. service members. It also looks embarrassing if they shoot down the missile that we fire at them.
Right.
So you probably want to take out Venezuela's air defenses before you blow up a drug trafficker. But if you take out Venezuela's air defenses, you're kind of at war with Venezuela. And if you're at war with Venezuela, you might as well go all in and overthrow Maduro. But then you
Right.
trigger this whole potential state collapse, potential increase in drug trafficking. It ends up being more than you wanted. If all
Right.
you wanted was a nice clip that you can post to social media, like we've been doing,
Right.
it's a bit more. It's a bit much.
Yeah.
So again, this gets to my argument why we've been talking about land strikes in Venezuela for more than a month, and we've yet
Right.
to do them, despite having all these assets in the region, despite having all this rhetoric. I think there is still a modicum of caution because I think people see that chain of events.
Do you think Maduro would ever give up his seat from without any, like, with how things are now?
Yeah. That's the other side of the coin is Maduro's been and his regime have been, according to all reports, desperately trying to find an off-ramp. The New York Times reported, offered basically to give all the oil to the United States along with all the mineral resources. Another reason why I don't think this is an oil war, because why wouldn't we take that deal? Separately,
sense.
members of his government offered to sort of negotiate a soft transition where Maduro would leave, but they'd stay in power. And I think the issue with this is, first of all, whether that would be acceptable to the Venezuelan people. Any form of government that doesn't involve, I think, Maria Corina Machado and Edmundo Gonzalez, who were duly elected last year. I think the Venezuelan street would be very opposed to that and would feel kind of sold out. And second of all, I think that there's probably an element, not to be too stereotypical, but of art of the deal here, which is the more Maduro keeps offering, the more the admin feels confident in asking for more. If you're willing to give us this much, why not keep holding out and keep pushing you and see if you can come up with a better offer? So I do think that there is a world maybe where we negotiate some form of ouster for Maduro. I'm not sure, though, that Maduro would be willing to. I don't know if the regime, I guess, the people under him would be willing to countenance all of them leaving power. Because not all of them can save their wrongs. Maduro can probably get a cushy flight to Cuba or to Russia somewhere.
China,
yeah,
vibe.
He can join. He can be a gamer with Assad. He
Literally.
can
Literally.
like he could probably secure that. But the people under him, the second, third, and sixth tier underneath,
Their
Probably not, and they're
heads will
probably
be on stakes.
exactly. So I think there's definitely a dilemma there.
Interesting. So interesting. This provided a lot of clarity to a really weird situation with a lot of moving parts and pieces. Anything else you want to touch on?
Yeah, I sort of want to drill down on this. You mentioned it's a weird situation because
Yeah.
I still think there's division. And it's still hard for me to read the tea leaves of what we actually want. I've settled on the idea that this is really a narco-trafficking global war on crime, is what I've kind of taken to calling it.
Hmm.
And in that regard, Venezuela is one aspect of it. If the Venezuela problem, the challenge, I still think that, like I said, a whole-scale, full-scale invasion is very unlikely at this point still. Um, but I think that even if that does happen and the U.S. completely, takes over and kicks Maduro out, I don't think it's going to stop the United States from viewing the region much, as a front in this war on drugs. And
Right.
I think that other countries might have other countries are probably on notice. Mexico is probably very concerned right now
Right.
that if the U.S. has proven that it can basically jury rig international law or its own laws, its own domestic national security
Make its
law.
own laws. Correct.
Yeah, I would say we're seeing the beast that arose after in the wake of kind of the Patriot Act and the global war on terror.
Right.
We're seeing that beast coming home, where
Right.
we've given the president such expansive national security powers that they're acting with very
He
few
declares any group
constraints.
of foreign terrorist organization, he can basically do whatever he wants.
Exactly. I think
Yeah.
Mexico is very concerned about this coming to them, the kind of eye of Sauron of the United States
Right.
turning on them and on drug trafficking there. Um, I think there's other countries, for instance, Ecuador, Trinidad and Tobago, elsewhere in the region, other governments that might be elected. Say if there's a new government that's more pro-U.S. in Chile, where security has become a major new priority, or in Peru, which is having elections next year. Other governments that might actually welcome an expanded U.S. Force presence there. I
Interesting.
think Ecuador in particular would love to have the kind of fine-tuned machine that is the U.S. high-value targeting system
Yeah.
applied to fighting the gangs that have taken over the country or that have
Right.
ravaged the country, I would say, for the past 5 years.
Right.
So, the reactions will be different, but I think that this is the opening volley. It's not the final blow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. Based on, because we talked about fentanyl production, but we know that these players that we just mentioned are really heavy cocaine producers. Which one is the like 1, 2, 3, who are the most prolific cocaine producers?
Yeah, that's easy. Colombia, Peru, Bolivia. 1, 2,
Got
3.
it.
Top producers. Yeah.
Okay. And
Mhm.
Mexico's mainly just, what's Mexico putting in?
Mexico's the logistics.
Hmm.
They're fentanyl, and then they are the ones who are trafficking over land, and then in the sort of littoral, the nearby waters, cocaine.
Where does U.S. cocaine primarily come from?
Primarily, grown in Colombia and then transited through Mexico is
Interesting.
the main. Or like I said, up this Pacific route, but that's usually up the Pacific to Mexico and then over the border.
So you
Last
think they're
mile.
going to start targeting Colombia a little harder?
Yeah, there's an analyst named James Bosworth who had a fun tweet, a funny tweet recently that was, maybe Maduro can ally with Trump to kick out narco dictator Gustavo Petro, um, and it's funny, but it's
Clearly.
plausible,
Yeah.
because I think that Gustavo Petro loves a Twitter fight. Trump loves a Twitter fight,
Right.
And that situation is both of them are getting exactly what they want, which is to rile up their bases
Right.
and go at it online. Um, I still think Colombia's has been, continues to be the United States' #1 security partner in the region. The
Hmm.
relations actually between the U.S. military and Colombian military are very deep, very strong. I think it's
Interesting.
unlikely we'd see Colombia like getting the Venezuela treatment.
Right.
and I know, but we're doing ourselves no favors by threatening that,
Right.
and claiming we might. Yeah.
Right. Interesting. So many dynamics at play. It's like really a chess game going on. It's quite complex. It's very
It's
crazy.
or more like Rock'em Sock'em Robots.
Literally. Everyone's just punching each other, trying their best. Who knows?
Yeah.
Henry, it's been lovely to have you break stuff down on this. So thank you.
Thanks for having me on.
And I'm your host, Emily Grist. We'll be back next week with another episode of Bureaucracy.